Maggie and her family were waiting when Ramous got back to the bed and breakfast. He walked in to find them sitting in the waiting room with their bags scattered everywhere. After all the hugs, Margaret confronted Ramous. "You didn't tell anyone where we were supposed to stay. So, we've been sitting here for the last hour and a half waiting for you." He looked at Emily, who was sitting and staring at him, with a smirk on her face, and said, "Emily, couldn't you give them rooms?" "Ramous, there's only one vacant room left until Monday. They will not fit in one room, sir." "All right, everyone come with me, except Emily, I meant everyone else." Ramous winked at her as he led them out the back door. He told them they're staying in the 3-bedroom house and he will stay in the last room in the main building. Ramous grabbed a change of clothes and carried them to the room. He gave Hank and Maggie 2 hours to get settled. Everyone met for a late dinner afterward and agreed to meet in the morning to go over the department position and the 5 cottages. Ramous moved all the new files into the room where he was staying, so he could review them. He stashed them under the bed. They wouldn't fit in his small office safe. The next morning, after breakfast, Ramous invited Maggie and Hank to his office. "It's so nice to see you guys. It's been too long and I've missed you. Before we start, tell me what happened. I heard 300 people were killed in an explosion in Seattle. Were you involved, Maggie?" "No, I wasn't. No one was. The FBI, CIA, and other federal agencies took the lead. They told us to stand down. Homeland Security controlled everything from cleanup to next of kin. Any firefighters and police officers who responded had to sign non-disclosure agreements or face termination. That was a horrible mess and made me eager to get out of Dodge. Do you know something about it, Ram?" The tone of your question implied you did. "I forgot how perceptive you are." "No, nothing I can talk about. Anyway, Maggie, I have already planned to hire you. When can you start?" "You mean I don't need to beg or threaten you with any improper activities from your past? I can start at the beginning of next month. That should give Hank time to prepare the kids and pack. Is that all right with you, Ram? If so, give me a job description, including salary and benefits, etc." "Yes. I haven't created a job description and the old one is outdated. So, just in case it concerns you, the salary will be $95,000 annually, with $1,000 a month living allowance. This is a small tourist town, so there aren't a lot of reasonable rentals. The city tries to make up for it by subsidizing the cost of living. Maggie, do you remember the 2 acres in Manzanita my parents had?" "Yes, I do." "Perhaps, if you took the job, you could rent while a house is being built on the 2 acres. Afterward, you guys could live there. I have been thinking of building on the property. Hank could design and oversee the construction. What do you think?" Hank answered, "Let's talk about it another time. We still have to sell our house in Seattle before we make those kinds of decisions." Margaret agreed. When her interview was done, Ramous and Hank spent the next hour talking about the cottages he wanted to build. They agreed Hank would oversee the project while the kids were in school. Hank offered to do the oversight for $3,000 a month until the project was complete. He expected the construction should take 3 months. Before they finished, the kids came running into the office complaining about the time it was taking. Maggie promised to take them to the beach. Ramous said hi to the 3 of them and chased them out of the office. Once they finished, he returned to his room to review the material he took from the bank. Ramous couldn't believe what he was reading. He'd wait until the next weekend before he revealed the information to Zoe, Mel, Kat, Mike, and, maybe, Peter. He joined his friends on the beach who were flying kites and playing in the surf. Maggie and her family were having a wonderful time. It was nice hanging with Hank, Maggie, and the kids. Ramous retrieved hot dogs and fixings from the kitchen, built a fire, and roasted them until they were black, ignoring the constant term, yuck. "Would you please stop, Maggie? The kids will not eat if you keep it up," he said, laughing. Maggie and Hank returned to Seattle on Sunday afternoon. Ramous was happy they came. Although, the information he was learning about St. Paul offset his excitement, and their plan for world domination leaned on the scary side. Although he made fun of the term, the real evidence was right in front of him. He moved all the files into the 3-bedroom house, and stayed awake until the early morning hours as he pored over the documents, graphs, lists, and reports. By Thursday, he had only read through half of the material, but still asked Zoe, Mel, and Kat if they could meet on Saturday morning. He asked Zoe to contact Mike and see if he could come. He wasn't sure if he wanted to involve Peter, but would play it by ear. During this time, when he wasn't poring over information, Ramous made a point of spending time with Zoe. They were getting close. He worried about how the new information might affect their relationship. He wasn't even sure if there should be one. Early Friday evening, while sitting on the back deck, Ramous asked, "Zoe, can I ask you a question?" "Of course, you can." "This may be an odd question, but how old are you?" "That's an odd question, Ram. I was born in the year 1998 and became 22 years old last February. I don't recall the exact day, but after all the programming, I'm 31 years old." "Why do you ask?" Ramous didn't know how to answer her because he didn't want to upset or insult her. "That's a good thing. Can you imagine me being involved with a teenager, say like 12 or 13 years old?" "Oh, I get it. How awkward for you. Does that mean you can date me? Am I old enough?" Who said anything about dating? It was an honest question. I didn't know how aging works for Gens. "Okay, I like you too. You have no idea." After a short pause, she turned to Ramous and asked, "Do you have more questions?" "Not yet. Shall we eat? Are you hungry?" "I'm not hungry at all. We should go for a walk on the beach, and maybe we can hold hands, boyfriend. What do you think?" Ramous was embarrassed. She had a way of getting his attention. "Okay, let's go for a walk." Technically, Zoe was only 8 years younger than Ramous, so the age difference was not bad, but he couldn't figure out how such a relationship would work. When all this St. Paul stuff was over, will she leave? His thoughts made him apprehensive and sad. She was important to him in more ways than just this investigation. As they walked along the beach, Ramous asked, "Zoe, it's my understanding the Gens have IQs well above 200. How does that work?" "Gens are intelligent, but I'm not so sure one's IQ is a proper way of measuring their intelligence. There are so many factors involved with our way of expression." "Well, when we talk, I assume we're at the same level of understanding. We talk with no conversational distractions, and we communicate well. You realize, Ram, 90% of communication takes place at an elementary grade level. Having an expanded intellectual capacity doesn't mean we can't converse and understand each other. If I were talking with a scientist about a particular subject, the conversation might go right over your head. In fact, I often have conversations with other Gens most scientists couldn't comprehend." "That makes sense. Ramous, there's something much higher than one's reason, and every human being is capable of obtaining it." "What's that?" "Spirituality. Spiritual understanding is much greater than intellect. Spirituality makes the highest levels of human, and even Gen, factual intelligence seem basic by comparison. I find it amazing you perceive life in such a way. What led to your conclusion?" "I read the Bible. It's the most intelligent, spiritual book written and nothing else in this world can match it. We Gens were born in the lab and are test tube humans. Except for my skeleton, I'm not too different from you. We both have DNA directing our growth, even our propensity to have certain features and to be ill throughout our lives. Consequently, we're similar. Ramous, those men who created us didn't grow us. They only directed the growth process, and DNA did all the work. There's no way humankind could recreate what DNA does. DNA came from an external source outside human understanding, and every Gen knows it. Are you saying you believe in more than, let's say, evolution? You believe in a greater entity, perhaps?" "I wasn't being cryptic, Honorable. I believe in God and understand He created DNA. He created all life. DNA has a life component. If DNA were only bits and pieces of particles or matter, it would just sit where it was placed like stones in a river or sand on the beach. It's not sedentary. It's alive. How profound. What perfect understanding you have. Well, after reading the Bible, I realized life had a spiritual element, one far exceeding intelligence. Those like yourself, because you're spiritual, have a higher understanding most can't get through intellectual education, and people like you understand life and its processes at a much higher level than the intellect can provide. The Bible changed my life. I made a habit of leaving Bibles lying around so others could pick them up and read. I hoped they would anyway. So, there's a God. DNA has proved as much. Also, I believe in good and evil. I know there are spiritually good people and spiritually evil people. Most surprising of all, either is a choice. I often thought of myself as a machine. Most of the time, I did what they told me to do, until I read the Bible. Then I realized, unlike machines which do things they're designed to do with no option of doing anything else, humans and gens have free will. We can choose at any moment to be good, evil, or indifferent. I learned all too well, because I used to rebel and hide from my superiors and wasn't the machine they hoped I would be. I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around what you just said. You are you? Yes. You know, if St. Paul found out I had learned this, they would terminate me. Ramous, there's a government agency holding all the patents and birth certificates of every general. If a gen is killed and the police get involved, they pull the patent, deliver it to the proper authorities, and their death is filed away in a vault in Washington, D.C. St. Paul has the authority to end my life anytime they wish, and there's nothing anyone can do about it. It's a good thing if they believe I'm dead. Zoe, there must be a way to change that. I'll not let that happen. If anything happens to you, I'll go after them, even if it takes the rest of my life. I believe you, Ram. She paused and looked directly into his eyes. Ramous, I have never killed anyone. The closest I've come to doing so was Peter, and I did what I did to save his life. I have never killed a gen either, although I would if I had to. I have a duty to protect human life, and if a gen tried to hurt another person, I would do everything necessary to protect them. Ramous put his arm around Zoe's shoulders and said, I believe you. The two spent the next 3 hours walking on the beach, talking. Afterward, they ate dinner with Mel and Kat. They were all quiet during dinner. Mel finally broke the silence. I've contacted Mike. He said he will be here by 10 a.m. tomorrow. Ramous was nervous about the information he planned to share. Mike showed up 20 minutes late, sorry about the flat tire. Ramous answered, we understand, Mike. Let's get started. I received a call from Peter's old secretary about an envelope from his friend Thomas Minor. Apparently, the secretary missed it as it was sent with the first package. It contained a key to a safe deposit box at a nearby U.S. bank. I went to the bank and opened the box. The box contained a notebook and another key to a different safe deposit box. That box was full of documents and 14 thumb drives, along with another key. When finished, I opened 7 safe deposit boxes in total. Ramous stepped to the side of the desk and slid out the 3 full file boxes he retrieved from the bank. No one said anything. From the top of the desk, he displayed a notebook to the fore and said, this notebook includes the initial plans for the Angel project. Mike interrupted. You got these files from a bank? How did Thomas get all those files out of the building? I don't know. Perhaps he was just too smart to get caught, and I was wondering the same thing, but I doubt they let him just walk out with the files. I wanted you to know what I did and hoped we could go over at least the notebook this morning. I suspect it will take several meetings to get through it all. There are a lot of files and I haven't even looked at half of the paperwork yet, or the several thumb drives included in the files. Everyone agreed to go through all the material, even if it took several meetings. Ramous held up a letter and said, I want to point out this letter, first. Once he had their attention, he said, on Thomas' cell is a video of the lab where they stole all this information. In the video, he showed a container with a human inside. That container was in transit and was at the Portland labs for 3 days only. They were transporting it to San Diego from the Seattle lab. According to the letter, that Jen in the lab, in Thomas' video, was born in 2017. The 2 containers in Thomas Minor's video contained a donor child and a successful 4th gen, both on their way to San Diego to complete the growth process. Now, I have a question. Do any of you understand why they created the gens in the first place? Mel answered, the first gens was an experiment in genetics. Dr. John Hartwig was a neurosurgeon and researcher in genetics. He was the first to grow skin cells on a potato. Ignoring all the steps leading to the first gens, the end purpose was to study growth and how to advance human development and intellect, but when the US government learned of the gens' abilities, they inducted them into national security programs, to conduct espionage. They created the second gens for that purpose. No, Mel. That's not it. Do you recall I said the person in the container was a 4th gen? Yes. According to the files, Dr. Hartwig made several amazing discoveries. Those discoveries led to the first and second gens, but they were not the desired beginning, end, nor for espionage. Ramous lifted another small notepad from the top of his desk and showed it to them. This notepad includes a list of over 200 names, names of the rich, the intelligent, scientists, and a host of high-level international politicians. This list also includes the names of financial donors and politicians who introduced and pushed specific legislation through Congress and the Senate. As far as I can tell, it also names all the scientists who performed research for the Angel Project. The letter and notebook contain all the startup information with its intended purpose. The men and women were planning on becoming gods. They intended to live forever in a reconstructed body. With their renewable life, they planned to take control of the world. I know, it sounds crazy. Doesn't it? Mel asked, are you saying we were test subjects for a group of rich creeps, who wanted to become gods, and live forever? Yes, exactly. St. Paul created the first and second gens for a single purpose, to lead them to the 5th gens by perfecting the growth and transplantation process. It was more by accident that the government got involved, but espionage was never the intended purpose. They started with aborted children, but the intention all along was to transplant an adult into an artificial skeleton and grow a new young body for certain people from around the world. The 4th gen in the container was one of 87 adult human transplants to survive the process of inserting an adult human brain into the artificial skeleton. Mike said, I overheard a conversation about that a month ago, but I thought it was just a hypothetical what-if conversation. I wouldn't put it past St. Paul to do just that. It wasn't hypothetical, I guess. The file went on to say that once they were confident, the process worked and they could repeat the process several times without significant failure, St. Paul planned to transplant its leadership and a host of other people into those skeletons. They hoped to be the 5th gens. They terminated all the 4th gens before they removed them from the containers. There was no need to keep them alive because they were only prototypes. Let me take a step back. I didn't mention the other group of gens, the 3rd gens. It blows my mind, trying to understand what these people were doing. The 3rd gens were the same as the 2nd gens, with one exception. They trained, or implanted them in the most advanced areas of medical science, and there are 96 of these 3rd gens with staff worldwide. St. Paul created the 3rd gens to advance Hartwig's work. St. Paul has stated in the paperwork, the 3rd gens have already exceeded expectations. These gens make our modern-day medical practices and research look like the Dark Ages. Now, back to the 4th gen in the container, the person inside was number 647. St. Paul murdered 646 homeless people, provided that one is still alive, from around the world to create the prototype 4th gens. The notebook explained how the process worked. Mel jumped in, that's murder and should be enough to bring them down. You're right, Mel. If nothing else, St. Paul is guilty of mass murder. The problem is, it will be hard to prosecute them without names or bodies. St. Paul was cruel in their experimentation, too. They started by removing as much of the human body as possible before the subject died. The researchers didn't even use a logical process, like retaining the heart, lungs, or kidneys. They just removed parts and recorded the results until the subject died. They had to learn what body parts were detrimental to sustaining life until the transplant was successful. So, St. Paul repeated the process over and over until they serially succeeded. They only needed to remove the brain and stem from the donor, but had to make sure the actual or artificial organs were in place and available to keep the brain and its stem alive until they can grow the organs through the growth process. Once they maintained the person long enough, they could finish growing the rest of the body, just like they did the first, second, and third gens. They now say they can complete the process in less than 1 year. However, it has taken them 11 years of repeated attempts to become confident with the overall process. Within the next 2 years, they plan to implant St. Paul's leadership into the artificial skeletons. After implanting St. Paul's management, they will recreate world leaders, politicians, scientists, and a host of other people, everyone on the list. Mel asked, along with all the scientific revelations, you're saying they have a master plan to rule the world? Yes, that's what I'm saying, and what these documents are revealing. Back to the beginning. The project managers talked about maintaining the viability of aborted babies who were near full term, and how to keep them alive. They started that process in the late 80s early 90s. Once they established the process, they manipulated the cells, DNA, leading to Rignor. She was the first successful creation, the first to survive in whole. When they reached 153 first gens, the issue regarding schizophrenia appeared. They thought it wasn't too bad and a simple chemical change fixed it. So, the second gens were born. St. Paul scientists perfected the process with the second gens, but they still couldn't transplant an adult into the artificial skeleton. That was supposed to be the responsibility of the third gens. Now, that St. Paul scientists have completed hundreds of experiments keeping the adult mind and brain stem alive, they will move on to the next step, the fifth gens. Along with the fifth gens, they will create one more generation, the sixth generation, who will be utilitarian. The sixth gens will be security and soldiers for the fifth gens. Can you imagine an army of gens? Kat asked. Wow. Imagine how damaging this information is to the St. Paul Corporation? Mike said, I had no clue. This is mind-boggling. It's good you have those files, Ram. How so? I'm sure they're still looking for them. If they find out I have them, there's nothing to stop them from killing me. I hate even having this information here, but I don't know where else to put it. Mike responded, the rumor according to my contacts in top management, I still have a few friends at the top, is these files were destroyed in the explosion in Seattle. There were a lot of angry people because of the explosion, not because it killed over 300 people, but because the files were destroyed. Now, I understand why. That modified the group's sense of security, but nobody said anything. Ramous could tell by the look on the young woman's faces they didn't have a clue about any of this. Zoe asked, we understood they created us for espionage. Is there more, Ram? Ramous answered, yes, there's so much more, including names, funding sources, proposed laws, and more, but it's time to quit for the day. We've learned enough to deal with right now. So, let's give it a break before we decide what to do with this information. Next time we meet, we can discuss who in the media we can approach. We need to find a personality popular enough, so that they won't get killed like the Oregonian staff. They all agreed. Ramous worried about Davis' safety and at lunch offered to put him up in the 3-bedroom until he was safe. Mel and Kat became eager to get out of town, out of the country. They wanted nothing to do with St. Paul any longer, since St. Paul presumed the 3 of them were dead. Ramous also worried about Zoe and was concerned about how she might handle the information. So, he kept the rest of the information between himself and Mike. There was no reason to worry them further after how Mel and Kat reacted. He caught the 2 of them crying on the back deck. He realized they were young and overwhelmed. They planned to move on, anyway. Later in the evening, Zoe explained that even though Mel and Kat were involved in espionage for many years, They never had to face their own people before. Besides, the information proved more than the two could handle as she explained how the rest of their team died in a Seattle explosion. After telling Ramous, she cried for the next half hour. He held her until she stopped. The next morning, as Ramous made his way to the kitchen, he noticed the RV was gone. For a moment, he assumed all three of them left, until Zoe met him at the back door. They left a note. Ram. I burned it already, but it said they were going to Spain. They had 2 villas there and will stay in one. She didn't think Ramous knew about Mark, so she said nothing about him. Ramous liked both and was relieved when Zoe told him. It seemed like the right thing for them to do.